Russian President Putin is saying in comments earlier today that the need to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine has not yet arisen and that he hopes that it will not. So this is a preview of an upcoming interview with Russian state television in which Putin said that Russia has the strength and the means to bring the conflict in Ukraine to a, quote, logical conclusion, adding there has been no need to use those nuclear weapons, and I hope they will not be required. Also stating we have enough strength and means to bring what was started in 2022 to a logical conclusion with the outcome Russia requires. Now, Putin signed a revamped version of Russia's nuclear doctrine back in November of 2024, spelling out the circumstances that allow him to use the country's atomic arsenal, which is the world's largest. That version lowered the bar, giving Putin the option in response to even a conventional attack backed by a nuclear power. Russia and Ukraine are also at odds over competing ceasefire proposals. Ukrainian President Zelensky saying in comments made public Saturday that Russia's announcement of a 72-hour ceasefire next week in Ukraine to mark Victory Day in World War II is merely an attempt to create a, quote, soft atmosphere ahead of Russia's annual celebrations. Zelensky instead renewed calls for a more substantial 30-day pause in hostilities as the U.S. had initially proposed, saying that the proposed ceasefire could start any time as a meaningful step toward ending the war. This also comes after Kyiv and Washington signed a long-anticipated agreement granting U.S. access to Ukraine's mineral resources. So this is a live look right here in Prague as we are expecting Zelensky to be meeting with the president of the Czech Republic. To speak more on this, I do want to bring in David DeFury, who is a former State Department official, also right now in Ukraine. David, we appreciate you joining us from Ukraine live here on this Sunday morning.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you're in Ukraine at the moment. You know, we were sharing with our viewers a live look of Ukrainian Zelensky in Prague. He's going to be meeting with the president there of the Czech Republic. You know, before we get into Putin's comments, you know, can you talk about the significance of this meeting today between the two leaders?
Sure. As your footage demonstrated, I think he's getting a warm reception in the Czech Republic. It's an official visit. They're doing all of the pomp and circumstance that recognizes the importance of President Zelensky and Ukraine to Czech Republic, to the people of the Czech Republic. Obviously, the Czech Republic fought against a Russian invasion in 1968. They were under the thumb of the Soviet Union for many years, and so they understand the danger that Russia poses under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, and that's why Czech Republic has been such a strong supporter of Ukraine. And it's, of course, very important for Zelensky to shore up support from European countries like the Czech Republic, especially if the U.S. is going to decrease its support under the Trump administration.
So let's also talk about what Putin commented on. You know, it's pretty stunning, I have to say, when he's discussing nuclear weapons, saying, you know, there has been no need and he hopes there will be no need. You know, is this posturing? I mean, under what circumstances would he actually move forward with any of this?
So there's what Putin says and then what he actually means, and rarely are they the same thing. And in this case, what Putin is probably doing is trying to remind the world, especially America and especially Europe, that he has nuclear weapons and he can use them if he wants. So it's a veiled threat against the U.S. and Europe, and it shows a tinge of desperation because he recognizes that with the minerals agreement, with renewed goodwill between the U.S. and Ukraine, the U.S. may continue to provide weapons and significant training and other support to Ukraine, and that's very worrisome for Russia. Although Putin wants to suggest that they're in a position of strength, they are not in a position of strength, especially if the U.S. maintains steadfast support for Ukraine and Europe steps up and provides more support. Russia is losing so many soldiers. It's spending 40% of its government budget on the military, and it can't keep that up forever.
So he's making these bold statements. I have to imagine that the U.S. would not let it get to that point. What is the end goal for Putin then? I mean, he's waving this threat around, but it's unlikely that he will actually act along those lines. So what is the end goal? Is he just trying to show strength as he's in, as you mentioned, a precarious situation right now?
I think this is a hand he knows he can play. He knows President Biden was very worried about an escalation to nuclear war, and he knows President Trump is as worried as Biden was, if not more. And so that's the hand he's trying to play. He's trying to remind President Trump of this threat. That's why he's doing it. Were he to use nuclear weapons, there would be such significant repercussions on Russia and Putin that I think he also worries about whether he could actually use them. So he's threatening to use them, but he knows that it could mean the end of Putin, his leadership of Russia, were he to choose to use them.
And I just wanted to point out to our viewers, as you and I are having a discussion happening right now in Prague, we do see Ukrainian President Zelensky right there with the Czech Republic president, as we were talking about strong allies as the conflict with Russia continues right here. Also part of this is the minerals deal that Zelensky signed with the Trump administration. How significant is this agreement, and what does this mean when it comes to the ongoing conflict?
Well, the most significant thing about this agreement is the fact that it was not signed before had become a thorn in the relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine. And now that it is signed, they have that behind them, and it is no longer something that divides our two countries. The agreement itself is in some ways more symbolic than implementable at this time, because it's going to take years to do the type of investment necessary to extract minerals from Ukraine. But it does also show that the U.S. has a significant financial and economic interest in ensuring that Ukraine is successful in defending its sovereignty. And so it's important in that manner as well. And it could be the first of many agreements between the U.S. and Ukraine that draw the two countries closer together.
There's also this temporary ceasefire that's set to take place in the coming week, 72 hours. Ukrainian President Zelensky pushing for a 30-day ceasefire. This is a step perhaps in the right direction. But as we take a look at the larger picture, do you feel like a longer ceasefire is even in the realm of possibility?
Well, President Zelensky has said he wants a 30-day ceasefire that would lead to a longer ceasefire. Putin has refused. Now, Putin recently said, as you mentioned, he wants to have a 3-day ceasefire around the celebrations in Russia of the anniversary of the success and the victory of the Soviet Union over Nazi Germany. And so this is really a ceasefire out of convenience for Russia so that they can have those celebrations uninterrupted. Oftentimes, leaders from other countries come to Moscow for those celebrations, so he doesn't want them to experience, attacks from Ukraine. But 3 days is not really in Ukraine's interest, so we don't know whether Ukraine is going to agree to it and observe it.
So, taking a look at the larger picture, you yourself are in Ukraine at the moment. What is the mood there? What is the sense that you're getting as you actually have boots on the ground?
Well, I just got here, so I'm getting a sense of that, and I will have a better sense over the days and weeks to come as I'll be here for a while. But I think that there's, a lot of trepidation about the recent events. And, things are changing very quickly politically in the countries that help Ukraine. In the U.S., President Trump has a different, view towards Ukraine. And so people are worried about the possibility that President Trump, despite the minerals agreement and renewed goodwill between our countries, could decline the amount of weapons and support that he provides to Ukraine. So they're very worried about that. There are new prime ministers in other countries, Canada and Australia. President Zelensky just had talks with Australia. So I think people here are very hopeful that other countries around the world and new leaders in some of the countries that have supported Ukraine will recognize the importance of this effort. People are war weary here in Ukraine, but they're still committed to defend the country. And I don't see any easing of the commitment of the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian government, to fight until the end, until they've successfully defended their country and they have sovereignty, or they have a ceasefire that's on their terms that are palatable to the people of Ukraine.
All right, David, we appreciate you joining us live from Ukraine on this Sunday morning.
Thank you.